Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about none other than Jurassic Park, but not the first one, actually the sequel, The Lost World by Michael Crichton. I have read this before. I've read it once before. If y'all don't already know, Jurassic Park is one of my favorite novels, the first one, and so I've read that one 5 or 6 times now. I reread it a lot. I love it, but I hadn't reread this one, and all I could remember that it was very different from the movie, so I was kind of sitting here like, I really want to reread this one. I want to remember. I don't know why I'm not rereading it, so I also never gave it a rating when I first read it, so I was really curious to know what my rating would be. So I reread this book. I read it in 2 days. And yeah, I literally like read half of it in one day, which I started in the afternoon. So I might have been able to read it all if I had started early morning, and then I read the other half the next day. But yeah, we're gonna talk about this. This is gonna be me ranting and rambling and just about everything. So full spoilers up ahead if you don't want to know what happens in this book, if you don't want to know the differences between the book and the movie and stuff like that, if you just don't want to know all these details. And I might mention a few things from the first book. I don't really think I need to talk too much about it in this though. But if you don't want to know any specifics, then this might not be the video for you, because I'm going to talk about it. I need to get all my thoughts out. So if you want to hear all that stuff, if you're interested, even if you never want to read the novel, if you just kind of want to know what the differences are, I'm going to talk about a lot of that stuff. So the novel starts out focused on Ian Malcolm, which it's not surprising if you've watched the movies, because Ian Malcolm fully survives. If you read the novel, then they make it out as if he died. A lot of people who read the novel have had major problems with this. Why I'm a little hazy on, because honestly, Michael Crichton didn't kill him on page in the first one. It was honestly only just kind of like implied as an offhand comment by not even an important like character that, oh, maybe he didn't make it type of thing. And so I feel like the way that it is explained at the beginning, I'm not surprised. It's not like he killed him off on page or anything. So I don't think it's really, I honestly just don't think that's a big deal at all. But anyway, if y'all don't know, the second movie and the second book follows Ian Malcolm largely. Now in the movie, it's quite a bit different because John Hammond's still alive in the movie, so he's got a team that he sends to try to like study the animals, and also I feel like on the down low in the movie he's wanting them to ruin the other team's plan, which he loses a lot of money, investment, whatnot, that his company goes to a nephew, I think. And the nephew sends in a team, like a big team, to go capture the dinosaurs so that they can profit on them, because, they're just sitting there. We need to make money. So Hammond's small team is supposed to, like, kind of mess that up for them, or at least he's got one guy in particular who's supposed to do that. So that's like the start of the movie. That's the setup, it's the start, and the only reason Hammond gets Ian Malcolm to go is because he reels his girlfriend to go, and she's already there, and he's like terrified for his girlfriend's sake. So it's kind of how they end up on the island in that. And that's like the beginning of the movie. Now the book is completely different. We don't even really get to the island until almost halfway through, I'd say. So yeah, there's a lot of background and science and just like lead up to it before they even get to the island for like the first whole half of the book. So already very honestly didn't mind all the lead up and the science stuff personally. I know some people might mind it if they're not like as interested in all the scientific stuff behind it. But in the book, there is a whole different character who's not in the movies, and his name is Richard Levon, I believe. And he's like this hot shot. Oh my gosh, what is he? Is he a paleontologist or something. He's something in the dinosaur realm or whatnot. And he has this, you know, he's kind of suspicious about what happened to Malcolm and where he went and everything, because in the book, which I'm trying to remember, did they do it in the movie? Anyway, it was very much covered up in the book as like, you know, and everybody had to sign non-disclosure stuff and not tell anybody what happened on the island in the first one type of thing. So he's very like suspicious of like, well, what happened to Ian and stuff. And he was hearing of a bunch of mysterious animals like washing up on the coast of Costa Rica and stuff, and that's prominent in the first one, but it kind of stopped off. And when he's like telling Ian this, he kind of presents it as this idea. He thinks that there is a lost world, basically, that there's just this little pocket to where not all of these animals actually became extinct. They actually were able to stay alive and thrive and survive here and everything, and he wants to observe them and like, you know, learn all this stuff that nobody's ever been able to learn before. And Ian he's a mathematician, I guess, type. He's a mathematician something, but he does so much more than mathematics. And one of the things that he was talking on was extinction and all this stuff. So Richard brings this up to him and he's like, you know, you could totally study extinction if we found this lost world and everything. And Malcolm's kind of like, no. And he's like, well, what if these animals start popping up again? If I can give you proof that they have started popping up again, washing up on shore, etc., that this is still very much like prominent and all this stuff, would you consider it? And Ian reluctantly says, you know what, yes, if they started appearing again out of nowhere, unidentified species, I would consider it. And then we kind of skip through some years and everything, and they've kind of kept in touch over the years, and Richard has been, and it kind of follows Richard a lot for the first half, honestly. Like, Ian's kind of the main character in the movie, and I think Ian is definitely used by Crichton to kind of like bring in all of his theories and monologues and all that stuff with the sciencey parts, but he's not really the main character. I think Crichton does a really good job in his books on having a well-versed and mixed bit of characters, and they're like all main characters. It's not just one main character. And so this is something that Crichton does in his books, is he doesn't do chapters the same either, if I can find one, but they'll like stop off like this, and it'll be like from a different person's perspective. Like, I don't know if any of these say exactly, but you'll have one thing where you're like, oh, we're following Sarah Harding, and then all of a sudden now we're in Costa Rica following Richard Levon. Like, you go and you see where all of these stories, what they're all doing, how they're connecting, and they eventually come together, but they still have their, you know, their parts separately, even when they're on the island together type of thing. So I really like how Crichton does that. It's very well done in my opinion, and it really adds for the build-up with like the sci-fi type of thriller or whatnot of this. It really adds to the build-up to put all the pieces together and like have all this. So Richard ends up, he's trying to get like this whole expedition together type of thing, but he's got to figure out where this lost world is. And he finally ends up getting a call from one of his friends in Costa Rica of another animal washing up. So he gets proof of this animal. Very hard for him to get proof, but he does it, he manages it, and he sends it off to Ian. And then he miraculously finds where the island is, and he goes off to the island without telling anyone, by himself with a tour guide from like the local town or whatnot, kind of sneaks away without telling anyone, without bringing any of his equipment. But he sent this stuff already in this sample and this proof to Malcolm. So Malcolm's like really taken aback, and he's like, oh no, what's happening, right? Because he knows everything that happened in the first one, and Malcolm has up to this point not told Richard anything that happened so far. So he doesn't know about the original Jurassic Park. Like, he doesn't know all that stuff because Malcolm still hasn't told him about any of it. So obviously Malcolm is thinking completely different things than Richard is, at this point, but he's trying to get in contact with them, and nobody can get in contact with him because, you know, he went off all whatever. And so Malcolm comes to Thorn and Eddie, which are the two guys who have been working with Richard to get these RVs ready and to get all of this equipment and stuff ready for him. And that is one of the similar things from the book and the movie, is that they do indeed have rigged out connecting RVs to RVs. The difference is that in the book, these RVs were rigged out a lot more than they were in the movie. And yeah, they had a lot more to them, and he like rigged out a lot more. They also do have the high hide that they have in the movie where they watch from the treetops. That is also in the book. There's more done with it in the book than in the movie, but it is in both of them. And then in the book also, there's actually an extra set of equipment. There's actually like a predator cage that they make, like when you go down in the water with sharks and you're like in the cage to where they can't get you. They made one of those and set it on the ground so that they could run inside and hide, and predators wouldn't be able to get to them as like a last resort. So thought through a lot of things, but yeah, those two inventions are also in the movie. So that's like one similarity, but there is not a ton of similarities. It's crazy because it's like I can see what they took from it, but oh my gosh, like the storyline's completely different. They like nitpicked the tiniest things to put in there. It's crazy. Another thing in the book is that Richard ended up getting some speeding tickets, and so basically he had to do some form of community service, and they ended up making him go and teach a class at a middle school, and so this is in 8th grade class, I believe. And he ends up picking the two smartest kids in the class to kind of be his interns, but all they really do for him is they go around and they just like do a bunch of errands and collect stuff for him and everything. And this is kind of funny because he's being followed, and this is why he's getting the kids to do it, so that the guy doesn't see what he's doing. And this ties into our antagonists of the stories that aren't the dinosaurs. And that is, if you remember from the first movie, he's lightly mentioned, and he is mentioned in the book. But Lewis Dodson, who is part of Bison, and they kind of brought Dodson back in as a main bad guy in the later movies, in the new Jurassic World movies, the last one, they brought him in as the main bad guy. He was originally just the main bad guy in the novels. He has been trying ever since his failure with Nedry at the original Jurassic Park to get his hands and to try to figure out, like, is there any way for me to get my hands on him? So he's had all of these people who were involved with it, and then Richard, because he contacted Malcolm and has been like, you know, spewing all this crazy stuff about a lost world, he's been having them followed to try to figure out stuff. So he had the kids doing everything for him, so they weren't like catching on immediately, basically. But he doesn't show up for a class with the kids, and so the kids are supposed to go on a field test with them that week, so they just go over to Thorn and Eddie, basically, who's making the RVs, because they're supposed to be done, and take them out on a field test. So they just go there, and then Thorn's upset because he's like, well, he was supposed to be back today, we're supposed to take these out today, and they're like, I know, we have permission slips to go with you and stuff. So this is another difference, if you guys haven't already noticed, is that in the book there are two kids and they're not related to anyone at all. They're just like random smarty pants school kids in the book. And in the movie, they make it one girl. They basically combine the two because it's a girl and a boy in the book, and the boy is a black boy and the girl is a white smart girl. And so they combined it and made it a black girl who is somehow Ian Malcolm's daughter, which I thought was interesting. I'm like, okay, you just combined the two characters and made it his daughter. That's okay. But yeah, so that's a difference. But you know, they still kept having a kid in it, so it's like, okay. But yeah, so they're kind of worried, and he's like, well, I did send him with my pack. He made the satellite phone and everything, so he tries to reach him on the satellite phone, and they do get him for a minute, and it breaks up, but within that little minute that they get him, they do hear him crying and screaming out for help and some other noises. So they're like, okay, we're gonna need to leave type of thing. We need to figure out where he is. They go trying to figure out where he is. Ian meets up with them and they end up figuring out where Site B is. The problem is that Dodson also had his apartment and all this stuff bugged. So when they figure out where it is, his guys know, and so he's told. So now everybody, you know, our bad guys and the good guys, they know where Site B is, they know where Richard is, and we're like, okay. Now the funny thing is that when Richard goes, we see him go to the island with his guide, Diego, and we're like, okay, you know, this is gonna be nice and everything, and you don't get any of the rest of that stuff until after you see them walk on the island for a little bit, and obviously something happens and it kind of just cuts off. So you get like the first bit of gripping horror thriller from Crichton, and then he cuts back and you don't really get back to that until the rest of them come to the island. So I was like, oh my gosh, that it's definitely, he has a way of gripping you and making you continue to read. Like, it's one of those books that's so hard to put down once you start reading it. It's so good. Oh my goodness. So during all this time, I'm sure we're going to go save Richard now, basically. But obviously the kids can't come. This is dangerous. So they send the kids off, or so they think. These are the two smartest kids ever. They find a way to sneak on board and hide somewhere, and they program the phone in a certain way to text at a certain time to where they won't suspect that they're with them. So they sneak on board because they don't think that's anything dangerous. They just want to go help Dr. Richard, you know. It's like, so anyway, we know that the girl sneaks on in the movie too. Okay, so this is another big difference from the book and movie, is that in the movie, Ian Malcolm has to be convinced to go to this island, and the only way he is by being like, well, your girlfriend's already there, and he's sitting here thinking, if I don't go, she's going to die, because I know how these things end. But in the book, he goes because he's going to save his friend, and he also wants to see what they've been doing on this island. Like, he's generally curious because, you know, there's more dinosaurs and this is a different island. He wants to kind of figure out what's going on because he knows something is. So obviously very different there. And also you'll notice I haven't said anything about Sarah Harding. Yes, she's been in the book, but her involvements haven't been like anything major in the plot line so far. The crazy thing about this is that she's one of the best characters in the book, and she's amazing, completely opposite of how she is in the movie. No offense, movie lovers, I love the second movie, but my dear goodness, Sarah Harding is dumb. They made her so dumb. Like, she's got the same name. She's supposed to be like this, I can't remember what they call it, but like, she lives and she studies the predators and everything, so she's supposed to be totally like awesome and like knows how to deal with stuff. And in the movies, it's like she goes and she tries to disturb things and touch things, and she gets attacked, and then she wears baby T-Rex blood on her shirt the entire time, thinking nothing bad's gonna come of that. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, this woman, this character that you are showing to us would have died with lions after an afternoon. Like, this is not the character that she's supposed to be. So like, the way that they make her character in the movie, even though they try to say she's the same character, no. Y'all are gonna like to hear about Sarah Harding in the book because she is amazing. Thorne calls Harding, he tells her what's going on. He's like, you can come if you want. I'll tell you all the information where we're going, yada yada. And she's like, okay, I'll think about it. And she immediately turns, just like, I'm leaving. I need to go back. I need to get on a plane. So she tries to make her way there, and she does. Obviously, she's going to be later than them, but she's trying to make it there. Because of the weather and because of the way the island is, there is very little ways that you can get on the island. You can fly, but there's only one helicopter from where they're coming out of, and there's only one landing place on the entire island. So you gotta have good weather, you gotta have, you know, the pilot's gone on something, so there's no way to fly, and there's only a couple places that you can get in on the water, and it has to be like very considerable weather too because of the way the tide and the rising. Like this island, which is another thing that's totally different from the movie, the island's geography is so different because this is more like a described as like a volcanic crater of like a circle almost. It's so cool. There's actually a map in here, but I'm sure you guys, you know, if you've seen the movies, you remember the island in, is it focusing? I hope it is, in the movie, and it's not built like this at all. It's just not. It's not like this place that you have to like climb, like stop a boat and then climb part of a cliff to get on the island in any way type of thing. It's just, and the way that it kind of like whatever's like that goes with so much of the story too, because of like the different sections and the different territories of all the dinosaurs, and it's just so easy to picture and keep up with it in your mind. And in the movie, you're like, where the heck even are we? It's like this dinosaur is chasing them all across the island right now, you know, like, but they just explain it so differently, and the island just looks so different in the movie that was honestly, because of the way you read it and you picture it in your head, one of the most jarring things for me. Already, as I have explained, like starting off the movie, it's just Dr. Richard who ends up on the island with his guide. His guide gets killed immediately, and so it's just this guy. So obviously it's very different and jarring scenarios from the movie, because when you go on the island, there's literally an entire mercenary team capturing dinosaurs, and then the entire observation team there. They're like all there, and they're all like hunky-dory and nothing's wrong type of thing. But it's not like that in the book, because Dr. Levon is there by himself until Malcolm, Eddie, and Thorn get there, which is another thing. I think in the movie, it's Eddie and Nick. I think his name's Nick, the photographer guy. And so that's not even, because it's a different expedition, right? So that's not even a role that they have. So Thorn is kind of basically what they did in the movie. How I've put it in my mind is that Eddie in the movie, the guy who goes to help them pull them out and gets eaten by the T-Rex, poor Eddie, he's basically a combination of Eddie and Thorn from the novel. Like, they kind of mixed him together. And there's a few characteristics of Eddie in the novel that they put into Nick's character. So it's kind of weird. They kind of mixed the one character, but then they also made a new character and put a few of the one character's characteristics in it. Hard to explain, but anyway, Thorn in the book is a lot cooler than Eddie in the movie. I mean, Eddie in the movie was like a solid guy, but yeah. And Eddie in the book is also a better character than Nick in the movie was. Honestly, Nick is so dumb, but Eddie still does some dumb stuff, but you know. Anyway, they get there with all of their equipment and stuff, and now they go through this really dense jungle a bit, and they find a little bit of a clearing and decide to set up all their stuff there. Now, this is one thing that I feel like is also vastly different from the movie, again, because of geography, because in the movie it's like, oh, well, we're on the outer place because the predators aren't here and we can kind of stay out of the way, and they're like, they literally show them chasing a bunch of herds like in a clearing, for crying out loud, a giant like clearing that they're just chasing them in. But in the book, it's like there's this tiny little clearing that a helicopter can land and that can put down their stuff, and you are surrounded by jungle. And this jungle is so thick and dense because there's been nobody, like, it's overgrown everywhere. They finally find a game path, right? A game trail, where the animals like hunt and whatever on, and that's a little bit whatever, so they try to like take that a lot, but it's just the difference of how hard it is to get around versus the novel and the movie is crazy to me. So they finally plan in place. They, you know, they put up their stuff. They start investigating all this jazz to find Richard, right? We're like, yay. Obviously, they find Richard. He's still alive. He's riding a bicycle and following a Tyrannosaurus. Because this guy's crazy. But it's interesting because we're sitting here and there's nobody else on this island, guys. Like, there's not this giant team trying to capture dinosaurs. Now, go back to the mainland. Dodson is there with a team about to leave on a boat. On the only boat that will like take off and go to this place because they've paid them a ton. He is with two other guys, his like two best men, Basilton, I can't remember, Basilton maybe, and King. That's it. They take a jeep, a couple things of equipment, and the three of them. That's all that is going to the island to do their extraction thing. And it's also a little bit different because they're not trying to capture a ton of dinosaurs. Dodson has this super fancy high-tech sound ray thing that like pierces the dino's ears and makes their heads hurt to where they'll all back up and they'll be able to run in and grab an egg. And then once they grab an egg, they go to the next nest and they grab an egg so that they can just get some eggs in a couple hours and then obviously leave. This is supposed to be very low impact, very like in and out, but they don't have a big team. It's just three of them with a couple of like backup guns and this sound thing, stealing eggs. So they're about to head to the island and none other than Sarah Harding runs into them and is like, can I catch a ride with you guys? And Dodson says, yeah, sure, you can ride with us. We're friends with Malcolm. Which they're not, but you know. And then when they're getting close to reaching the shore, Dodson pushes Sarah off of the boat and just leaves her to like drown. Sarah freaking gets her shoes off and then makes it and swims to shore, finds a cave entrance and pulls herself up and like passes out. I'm like, dang, girl. It's actually kind of funny because in the movie, she's implied as being like the first one to get there. And in the book, she's literally the last character to get on the island. So that's completely opposite. So now at this point in the book, we are definitely like halfway through. We're now all on the island. We're over halfway. Things are starting to happening. Things are starting to happen. So obviously now we got three bad guys who are on the island and starting to steal eggs. So that's nice, right? They find out, oh yes, I didn't mean to mention, they find out that the kids are there because the kids hack into the system because this system is still up and working because it's running off of like the heat and the fumes and the whatever from like the volcanic stuff. They figured out some way to like make it run off of that instead of like normal power sources. I can't think of words right now. Oh my goodness. It's still running. It's still up and running. So the cameras still work. So the kids whatever into the cameras in the RV while the guys are out and they end up saving their lives. And that's how they realize they're there. Yada yada. Then of course, the kids are like, later at some point the kids are like, somebody else is here. And they look at the screen and everything. They're like, oh my gosh, it's Dodson. Like this dumb guy. What is he doing? He's gonna ruin everything. So they go and they do their sound thing and taking the eggs, right? And that works all fine and dandy. And then they come up to the Tyrannosaur nest. And Dodson's just like, doesn't matter what animal it is, it's gonna be no different. Goes up to the Tyrannosaur next. Tyrannosaurs look at him like, what sort of punks have the audacity to climb up to our nest and in our territory, you know? Like, excuse me? Like, they're just kind of shocked, like, what kind of dum-dum did this? And starts turning on the thing, really agitates them, He gets it high enough to finally agitate them enough, though, to where they don't charge him, but they have to like pull back and their head's hurting. I believe it's King who like slides down and runs for the egg and quickly like whatever's up and all this stuff. And then, which is just like funny, he runs back to the car. But then the other guy, Basilton, is noticing how much the T-Rexes are fighting against the sound thing, and especially when they notice them go in the nest and then come back out. He's kind of like, I don't think they're gonna care about the sound. I don't think they're gonna let anybody else come out of their nest again, so he won't go down there. He's too scared, and so Dotson tries to do it, but he's got the sound machine and he trips and he lands and breaks one of the baby T-Rexes, because there's 2 that have already hatched, I believe, and another 2 or 3 eggs, something like that. Or maybe there were 4 eggs and then 2 that had already hatched. So he breaks one of the baby's legs, falling on it, and his sound machine also like kind of breaks, like it turns off. So then the T-Rexes, they're mad, but they're different than in the movies. They're more like slow and patient and kind of like, you know. The thing is that they read, oh, T-Rexes can't see well, so they just stand there and don't like do anything because they think they're not gonna see them until, you know, the T-Rex then grabs the one guy, like pushes the one guy over and then rips his arm off basically. And then Dotson is like, oh my gosh, they can see us, and he hightails it out of there while the T-Rex is distracted by the other guy. But they still took something out of the nest, so the T-Rex begins to pursue them. They almost end up driving off a cliff, yada yada. And they're like, oh, great. So Malcolm and them go to the nest to kind of figure out like what happened, what were they doing, yada yada, because they couldn't see the nest particularly well, I guess. And so they get there and they're like, oh my gosh, I think they took an egg and all this stuff. And then they see they broke one of the baby's legs. And this is actually interesting because this is something that is in the movie, right? There is a mama and a daddy T-Rex in the movie, and there's a baby, right? So we just have more babies in this one and more eggs. But in the movie, Nick, the camera guy, takes the T-Rex, saves him, and brings him back to the trailer where he's going to somehow, you know, they're going to somehow magically fix this T-Rex. And he thinks that's a good idea because this T-Rex has already been whining and crying for its mom for so long, yada yada. Not a good idea. But in the book, and it's funny because him and Sarah do it in the movie, so it's kind of like a combined, like, how can you be this dumb, Sarah? In the book, when they're like, well, what do we do with this one? Oh, the T-Rex, because they look and stuff, and the T-Rex actually grabs onto his boot, and he can't get him off the boot because he's got a really strong grip and everything. And Sarah looks at him and she's like, shoot him and let's go. And you're like, what? Sarah Hart? Yeah, because she's like, he's never going to be able to recover from that. It would be more painful and more cruel to let him live like this. And the parents, you know, ran off after the babies. They're probably not going to be too long, but they're not going to know whether the person, you know, like, they're not going to know that the people here didn't do it. They're just going to think that the baby died from the people who are already in the nest type of thing. So that's what she tells him to do. But Eddie does not do that. Eddie brings it back and saying, I just couldn't, blah, blah, blah. And then Sarah's like, ugh, fine, I'll look at it. It's already here. And it's not even Ian, because Ian's just like, okay, yada, yada. It's actually Richard, who's like, let's take the kids up to the hide because I have a very bad feeling about this. So it's kind of interesting because Sarah didn't want to do it in the first place, but then her and Ian also weren't like expecting the T-Rexes to come and look for their baby, but Richard was expecting it. So one of the main things that is in the book and is in the movie is the Rexes do come, they sense the baby, they start knocking the RV off of a cliff, right? They're like, get out of here. And they also like kind of deduce in the book, as long as in the movie, that because the baby was here and everything, the mom and dad will come back because they're expanding their territory now to try to keep their baby safe. The difference from the movie and the book is that when the RV goes over, obviously it's only Sarah and Ian. There's not the extra character, how Nick is in there. All of them went to the high tide except for Ian and Sarah. So it's just the two of them. And when they fall and the RV goes over, Ian actually slams into something and re-injures his leg. That was very badly injured in the first one. And so he can barely move at all. Like, he is not able to do anything from the waist down type of thing. And so Sarah literally ends up carrying him to get him out of there. And Thorne is the one who comes to help them. And he kind of, very similar to Eddie, does the same thing. But the T-Rexes don't come back and eat him at that point in time. So that was an added in thing. That's not in the book. But another big difference for me, like I was saying before, was Sarah Harding's character. So obviously she has like swam to shore to save herself against like really rough currents and all this in sea. She literally like climbs back up with Ian on her back. So she's like really physically strong and she's really fearless. So in the book, they actually also have an electric motorcycle. So they have more access to vehicles in the first place. There's not this whole like migration of them across the island like in the movie. They're basically just trying to get everybody back together and safe and then find a way, because you know some of their equipment and their RVs and stuff are destroyed, to make it to where the helicopter's coming to get them. So the helicopter is literally coming back the next morning. They're only supposed to be there for like a day to come and get him. So it is like a lot of stuff, but she's so fearless. She not only does she do that stuff, but she takes this motorcycle, and there's this whole altercation and this whole scene with the raptors and the hide and then the predator cage. One of the kids gets locked in the predator cage and the key gets stuck around the raptor's snout and he can't get it off of him because it's like a wiring thing, and they end up trying to roll him away, and so half of them end up pursuing them, and then the other kid, the girl, ends up going with Sarah on the motorcycle to pursue the raptor that has the key around its mouth. And so Sarah literally is chasing a raptor whose like mouth is like whatever's shut because the key is whatever's around it, on a motorcycle to get this key. And they do end up catching up with it, and Kelly is the one who has to shoot, and she finally ends up getting it. So they end up killing the raptor and getting the key, which is just like, okay. And then once they finally escape from all of that, they're like, okay, well, we have to, like, got to find a way to get us all to the helicopter pad. And so Sarah's like, okay, yeah, like, how do we do that? And they're like, well, there is another vehicle, but we left it here or whatnot because it broke down this time and all this stuff. And so Sarah goes out on the motorcycle by herself at night through the jungle to go and find. She finds it. It's surrounded by dinosaurs. She tries to climb a tree and get in from it from the top, but then she ends up falling before she like whatever's it, and the dinosaurs kind of like see her and like freak out, whatever. I can't remember what kind of dinosaurs it was supposed to be at that part either, but she ends up rolling underneath the car to like hide and get away from them. But then all of a sudden, all the dinosaurs leave. And she's wondering, you know, like, why did they all, like, just get out of here? And it's Dotson who she sees running. Like, she recognizes the boots, so she kind of kicks him over from under the car. And then he's like, what are you doing? And all this stuff. And then they hear it. And you know, when you hear it in a dinosaur movie, like, you know what you're hearing. You know? You know. So they hear it. And then he freaks out, jumps down, and gets under the car with her. Rexy comes by. Now, you'll remember Dodson did some very, very bad things to Rexy and his children. Stole one of his eggs, broke the other one's leg. Rexy doesn't like Dodson, right? So Sarah's sitting here, she's waiting, you know, she studies predators for a living. She literally, like, you know, this is what she does. And she notices very quickly, Rexy can smell us here. Rexy's not going to leave. This girl was an absolute savage, anchoring herself on the car to then start pushing Dodson out from underneath the car slowly. He had like no, oh my goodness, no chance until the Rex all of a sudden just grabs his legs because he sees him and takes him back to his nest. And then when she stops hearing the footsteps, she just pops right up, gets the car started, and goes. She's a savage. She does a lot more in the book than she ever does in the movie. She's a lot cooler. So those characters are very, very different. Another thing that I found funny about the book that's also different from the movie is that I said Ian Malcolm re-hurt his leg, which makes a lot more sense because, you know, he had such a horrible injury at the end of the first one. Well, he basically ends up hyped up on morphine again for the second half of the book almost because of that instance. So they're just kind of dragging him around with them, heaving him in places, and he's just high on morphine again, and he was pretty much high on morphine half the book in the first one, so it's kind of funny how they did that, but that's like not the case at all. He's like the main star and like in it throughout the entire movie. So honestly, there's a lot more things I haven't talked about. I haven't even talked about the kids that much, what they do like throughout the book. I haven't told you like who all dies or how all of this stuff works. I haven't gone into everything that I could go into. But I think those are like the big main differences for me. Just the fact that it's like an entirely different plot. It's so hard to find those little things. I will say the raptor chase on the motorcycle scene though is kind of cool because they actually do something very similar in Jurassic World when Chris Pratt is like riding with the raptors on his motorcycle. So I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh my gosh, they pulled that from this book. And another thing is there's actually contours, which I wish Crichton would have done more with in this book because he really didn't touch on them much, but they were terrifying creatures and they blended in so well with their surroundings. They were almost like described as a small T-Rex that could blend in with any surrounding. So it was like a smaller T-Rex that had chameleon powers. That's kind of like terrifying, right? And I just thought that was interesting because they also used that in the first Jurassic World because they made the Indominus Rex have that chameleon power. I don't think they showed it off very well in that one, honestly, but like they did kind of imply that. So I tell you, if you really read these books, you find like things in each of the books that you're like, oh my gosh, this is in this movie and this is in this movie and this is in this movie. Like there's so much material. But when reading this, I really thought for a while that it was going to be a 5-star because like Crichton just does such a good job setting the stuff up. So good. But after we got halfway through and the action started and everything, there were kind of some things that bothered me with the second half of the novel. So it wasn't a 5-star for me. I think I'm landing on a 4.5 star because I still really enjoyed it. But Malcolm, I mean, it's about dinosaurs, so I know there's like evolution stuff and all this stuff. But I feel like in this one, because there was so much more science stuff in the plot to begin with, and it was less action in the plot than from the first one, and because Malcolm's in his high thing again, there was such a long monologue from Malcolm about evolution this time, and there was just more mentions of it all throughout the story than there ever was in the first one. So I was just kind of like being a little bit like I'm overhearing about this, you've already talked about this and mentioned this I don't know how many times type of thing. So that was a little annoying to me. Also the ending, I really wanted to talk about the ending because I felt like the ending was kind of lackluster for me. They're supposed to catch the helicopter, but basically what happens is Sarah hardly misses it, but she misses it and they somehow don't see her as she comes into the clearing, and so they leave without her. So then they're like, what are we gonna do? But it really felt like everything leading up to that point had been really well paced and well done, but there was not that much left in the book. I'm not even sure how much left, like maybe 30 to 50 pages at most, if that. So they have to like bring her back and then them figure out how they're gonna leave the island, and then they just like, they do it like this. It's like everything goes perfectly and they just get away from all the dinosaurs perfectly and there's no more anything. And it's just like wrapped up in all of the danger, and everything that had been happening just ceased so quickly that it was like, that just feels like too easy and perfect of an ending the way that they did it, because they're just like, oh yeah, one of the kids just magically finds this on the desktop, and then, okay, so now we know there's a boathouse and we can see that it's got a boat in it. So we're gonna miraculously from all these raptors and miraculously end up at the same spot as Sarah is in her car coming back, get all in and away from the raptors and not be pursued in any way somehow, get to the boathouse straight up just like that, because somehow we just figured out where it was easy, and the boat's gonna have all of the gasoline in it and everything's gonna be fine. We just come out of this little cliff opening, whatever, and now we're in the ocean and we're free. It was just wrapped up too nicely at the very end. Along with that, there was some like underlying science mystery stuff that they were like, well, why were none of the herbivores getting to full size? Why are they dying young? Why is there this many predators on the island? And they basically concluded, they were like, well, it's because they were feeding them sheep, ground sheep, and that they have this like disease that like causes like mad cow, you know, all these different things that they name it in different animals. And I was like, okay, I feel like it didn't explain everything, because they were just saying that this is what was causing them to die off early and all this stuff. But if they were feeding it to the predators, why weren't the predators dying off early? You know, because the predators were like full-grown predators. It made sense to say, well, a whole bunch of the herbivores are dying because of this disease or whatnot, because they're being bitten or whatnot. And so more of them are dying off to where the predators can just eat them. They don't have to hunt. They don't have to do as much work. So they're just, you know, there's can be more of them, yada, yada. But I'm like, well, how are they still at an amount that they're sustaining all of the overflow of predators? That's like 2 times what you say it should be. And how are none of the predators sick? Why are they all getting to full grown age and all of this stuff? Like, it just didn't make full on sense to me. I felt like there were still too many questions with his conclusion. Those are all my thoughts on this novel. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I feel like I have raved about Jurassic Park, but I haven't really given content warnings on Jurassic Park. I guess in my head, I just assume like everybody knows what Jurassic Park is, and Jurassic Park is literally a bunch of dinosaurs getting out and killing people. So like, should know what they're getting into just by the description. But just to be clear, for anyone who doesn't know as much about it, or, you know, the details, or thinks it might be like the movie, this and the first one is indeed a horror thriller. It is classified as a horror novel, and there is a reason for it. Some of Michael's descriptions are very, very gory and graphic. So please, please don't read the book and then come at me and be like, why would you make me read that horrible thing about Ned Reed-Catry? Like, why couldn't I just have the movie version? Well, I wish I had the movie version too, because that was really disgusting, but just don't come at me, okay? Also, it does have cussing in it. The first one has cussing. This one has cussing. I think this one has quite a bit more, because Watson and his team were like very much cussing quite a bit. In the first one, I just remember a couple of things trued here and there, but doesn't bother me quite as much, because I mean, people are getting eaten by dinosaurs. Not that you should really ever cuss, but it seems like one of the times that, you know, it's not completely out of character and crazy to hear somebody say a cuss word before they're about to be eaten. So I know people are sensitive about certain cuss words. I try to remember which ones they are, and I can never remember. I know the S word is in the first one at least twice, probably, at least. Again, it's not excessive in that one. I feel like there might be one Lord's name in vain in the first one. I feel like I remember there being at least one. Again, it's really not excessive in the first one. Like, it's something that just, I didn't even really notice that much because there's so much else going on. But this one I did, just because they were doing it in just normal dialogue conversation, and the bad guys were just being a bit excessive with it. A couple chapters. So I would say there's more in this book than the first book, but I also think there's probably more gory graphics in the first book, probably, because there's not as many, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think now. Is there more people who die in this book, or the first one? I would have to do that math, and I don't feel like doing that right now. So those are my thoughts. Probably way too many. Thank you if you sat around and listened to this the whole time, and let me know what you think in the comments if you've read this or haven't read this, or you just seen the movies. Like, what do you think about the differences or whatnot? Yeah, yeah, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. We'll see you next time.